It's great to be joined today by Bruce Schneier, who is a fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. Bruce, later on in today's program, we're going to talk about the recent revelations regarding Yahoo and email. But you recently commented on other corporate denial statements, other companies rushing to say, we're absolutely not doing that. And I think to summarize your view on some of those denials is skeptical an understatement. You seem to think that this is more common than what we've heard so far. Is that right?
It probably is. Certainly we know that the NSA co-ops corporate surveillance regularly. Sometimes they use court orders, what seems to be in the Yahoo case. Sometimes they just steal the data. We know that happened with Google and their overseas data centers. Sometimes they will buy it. Sometimes they will use threats. And when you read some of these corporate denials, they tend to be very carefully worded, and always look at the wording and the parsing, because my guess is this is much more prevalent than a particular news story. And we just hear about little bits and pieces of what's a very pervasive surveillance program.
You've spoken about pretty extensively this idea that you actually gave a TED Talk called The Security Mirage, where you talk about security trade-offs. And very often when we hear a story like we do about, authorities, agencies were reading people's email even before they read the email, for example, very often the average sort of person will think about it in terms of, does this sort of feel like I'm getting more security relative to how much privacy I'm losing? What's the sort of fundamental problem with thinking about these news stories and these surveillance techniques sort of in this amorphous, does it feel like a good trade-off method? What's wrong with that?
Trade-off's probably a good way to think about it, but it's not security versus privacy. It's security versus security. So we know that pervasive surveillance by government makes citizens insecure. I mean, that's why we don't all move to China or didn't all move to East Germany or former Iraq. That government surveillance is toxic for governments to do, and it is toxic for populations to be subjected to, which is why when we built the United States Constitution, we put in very strong rules about police surveillance and how it had to be tailored and targeted and minimal and necessary. These programs fly in the face of that, and that makes us less secure. I mean, we're not saying that the FBI or the NSA shouldn't conduct surveillance. It's that broad surveillance of populations is bad for our security. And on top of that, it doesn't actually give us security against criminals and terrorists and all those other things. That's sort of the other half of it. So it's really the way to look at it. And unfortunately, this is hard, because when people are scared, they're willing to say, do whatever it takes to make me feel less scared. Even though it might be ineffective, even though it might be corrosive, people are willing to go along with it.
I'm going to get into the details later in the program about some of the past fines that Yahoo was a victim of with regard to not participating in PRISM. But can you talk to us a little generally from your knowledge? What are some of the ways, or maybe a better way to say it is, how prevalent is it that government agencies will try to strong-arm some of these big tech companies that have a lot of data into playing ball with them, either in terms of data turnover or backdoors, et cetera? How does that function in the real world?
We don't know a lot of the details. We just see snippets of it. So we know in one case, the NSA bribed RSA to put a backdoor in one of their encryption systems. So we know that. We know that a lot comes from legal compulsion. We saw the Verizon order. That was one of the Snowden documents. Now we're seeing this Yahoo demand. We see bits from different companies' transparency reports. My guess is that when you had the more traditional companies, the telcos, there was a tradition of playing along. So we know that the NSA put massive eavesdropping equipment in AT&T's data centers around the country. And they did that by asking nicely. But AT&T had a history of cooperating with the NSA throughout the Cold War. So this was just an easy thing to do. When they did the same thing to a company like Google, Google probably said, go away, we're not going to do that, which is why they had to resort to other mechanisms. So I think there's a lot of culture between the telco culture and the Silicon Valley culture, the differences. And it's a lot about relationships. You want to help. If you're approached by the U.S. government and told there's an attack imminent, please help keep America safe, it's hard to say no. But it shouldn't be hard to say get a warrant. It shouldn't be hard to say go before a judge, follow the law, and then we will help.
Do
That
you
just seems like
feel, would you feel differently about a lot of this if instead of knowing that particularly the bulk surveillance that was exposed by the Snowden leaks and subsequently by the initially incorrect statements of the NSA regarding how effective this type of surveillance is, would you feel differently, broadly speaking, about this type of surveillance if we found out it really was effective at preventing real life violence, terrorist attacks, etc.?
Well, the Fourth Amendment's always about trade-offs. And we'd have to look at that. And if it turned out that these tools were extraordinarily effective, we would have to look at the cost, look at the benefits, and make a trade-off. I mean, if you think about it, we already give the police extraordinary power to peer into our personal lives. Why? Because we know it solves crimes. We know it keeps us safe. We just have mechanisms around that to ensure that the police don't abuse their authority, and more or less they work. So it really isn't absolute. It's about figuring out what the limits are and figuring out how to give authorities these capabilities without losing our liberties, without losing our freedoms. And we can do that. We've done that in the past. We can do it in the future. But we have to have the facts to make these decisions as a society.
I'd like to talk a little bit with you about computer security in the context of the upcoming election. And every election, there are a sort of broad range of different concerns and allegations that crop up regarding often the tampering of voting machines. Donald Trump has been more frequently using the term rigged, and whether it applies exclusively to voting machines, it appears the answer is no, but that may be part of it. From a computer security perspective, when we think about a national election, which is really 50 individual state elections, often managed in pretty drastically different ways, what are the concerns that everybody should sort of generally be aware of when it comes to computer security?
When I think about the election and security, there are three areas that I worry about.
Yeah.
The first one is a registration system, that a lot of havoc can be wreaked by deleting or changing voter rolls. People try to vote and they can't because they're not on the system. There have been probes in several states. There have been tests, a lot of shoddy security there. The second is the election machines themselves. A lot of them are vulnerable to hacking, some of them in key states, especially the ones that are touchscreen only without paper audit trails. And the third is the tabulation and dissemination, that after we vote, those totals are sent up the chain and aggregated. And there's a lot of room for attacks there. So looking at those three steps, those are the vulnerabilities. And I think we need to really apply some technology here. It's a bit late for this election. We have to really pay attention and use humans to try to secure our system. But I worry about Russian involvement. I worry about kids playing politics. I think these are important concerns, less in the presidential election, more in local elections where little changes can make a big difference. But I think we have to worry about our election system and whether it is critical national infrastructure in the same way our power grid is. And I think you can make a case that it is.
From a purely sort of logistical and technical standpoint, of the three areas of concern that you mentioned, which would be the easiest for sort of a lone wolf to affect, and which might be more on the spectrum of requiring a coordinated effort?
Pretty much everything can be done by a lone wolf. I mean, this is the thing about computer security. It doesn't require a nation state to do it. It could be two guys in a basement somewhere. So that really isn't the factor. What really matters is whether it will be effective. And if you think about it, if you wanted to swing the U.S. presidential election, it's not easy. You're not going to know where the hinge points will be. You can't do a lot of swinging because, it'll be noticed. More worrisome are local elections, state elections, city elections, county elections, where there are much fewer eyes on it, where the stakes are smaller, where there's more petty infighting. I worry there more. If you think what's happening about this election, we're seeing Russia do kind of a disinformation campaign, which really isn't attacking the election, but attacking the information process leading up to the election. And that's something that a nation state might do. We talk a lot about election vulnerabilities, and they're serious. Pulling it off is still a lot of luck and a lot of skill. And I think that's in our favor, but we really should secure our systems because we don't have a process if there's a problem. I mean, we don't have a system to vote over a week later,
right,
to fix it. If we open up the machines and the votes are all 0-0, we just don't know what to do. And after an election, there are sides. Now we can discuss what to do and nobody cares. The day after election day, half of the country is going to say fix it, other half is going to say don't fix it, it's fine. Right? It'll become partisan. So whatever we do, we have to do now before we know the results.
No doubt about that. We've been speaking with Bruce Schneier. He is a fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. Really a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.